Yanni, welcome to the Sarah's podcast.
Thank you very much, Stelios.
So it's I've sort of wanted to get you on for a while, and I've sort of had your name in my list, and then I thought, well, let's reach out now, and perfect timing. I get you whilst you're in Spain.
Indeed, yes, purely by accident. We actually came over here for 10 days. And that was 5 days before lockdown. So we ended up kind of getting stuck here and then renting a house, and now we've got a cat and we've bought a car. So it looks like we're going to be here for a couple more months.
Nice. So you might as well just move over there, no?
I'm not discounting that entirely, to be honest. Especially looking out the window now and looking at the mountains and the last bits of snow, it's seeming like a better and better proposition every day, I think.
Honestly, mate, the weather over here the last few days has been disgusting. Honestly, yeah, I'd be anywhere other than the UK right now. It's just been so wet and horrible.
Well, we're looking at about 35 degrees from now to September. So, I will have to come back at some point, but them's the breaks.
Don't rub it in too much, mate. So tell us a little bit about how you got started, pre-Meatliquor, and post-Meatliquor.
So I was once described as an accidental restaurateur, and that is a description I completely took to heart. It perfectly describes my situation. I was actually a technician working for mainly ballet and opera companies and festivals for about 15, 20 years. And during the last, or just before the last financial crash in 2008, I kind of saw the writing on the wall and decided that I needed another income stream. And because during any financial crisis, the things like theatre and music, and as we know, food and drink, those luxuries are the first to go. So I bought a little burger van I had a couple of grand in an ISA account, and I kept getting these letters from the bank telling me that I was getting like 0.1% interest, and so I thought, I reckon I'll do better than that. I bought a little burger van, and it actually even came with an old Nissan car to tow it with. It was $2,000. You can imagine the state of it. And from that, I started doing a few little things at festivals, mainly catering to crew and production, rather than out front to the gibbering hordes, so to speak. And from there, we started doing parties in London, effectively street food parties. So we did a series of events called Towpath Festivals, which moved along the canal in East London, and bits of abandoned ground. We'd get a few street food vans. So it'd be the Meat Wagon, Petra's milkshake, chocolate milkshake van. There'd be a vegetarian wagon. There'd be a bar and a big fire. And one day, after about a couple of years of that, the Meat Wagon got vandalised really badly, and it was just before I was going off to do a job at Secret Garden. So I ended up borrowing some money off a friend and buying a new van, pretty much overnight, and getting up there, doing the job. And then 4 or 5 months later, just before Christmas, the van got stolen. And this was just in the days where Twitter was really picking up pace, and it became quite a trending thing on Twitter. Back before Twitter was what it was now, before it was actually quite a nice place to be. And we opened in the beginning of January with my then business partner. We found a pub in New Cross that was changing hands, and it had an abandoned Italian restaurant on the middle floor. And as with any pub in South London, you need to make sure it's always occupied, because otherwise you get squatters. So we moved in there for the period, it was a very brief period between the pub being sold and all the builders moving in and doing everything, and started the Meat Easy, which was a riotous success in every sense of the word, and was cocktails and burgers effectively, and pretty much the first time that had been done. That lasted a few months. We then used the proceeds from that to buy another Meat Wagon, which was the final Meat Wagon, an old Manhattan ambulance, and converted it and ran that around the festivals for 6 months. And that carried on going for years. It's actually now been taken apart. It's all over the walls at the Croydon branch. But during that period, we had a lot of people sort of come. Pretty much every single person who was anybody from the restaurant industry was coming in, not just from London, but further afield, from the States, from Switzerland, from Germany. So we knew we had to do something. So we gathered together some people from the industry that we knew. It was only like 4 people in total, and then some family, and we got together a very, very modest amount of money. And we found this space that was in an old brutalist car park behind Debenhams on Oxford Street. And that became Meatliquor. And that's now a thing of the past, as the building was demolished to make way for offices and a hotel, I think earlier this year or earlier last year. So yeah, it did about 9 years in that space, and it's now moved on to another space just down the road in Soho. But since then, I think we opened, it was about 11 or 12 over the space of 6 years, I believe, including one in Singapore. So after that, I decided to, call it a day as far as that was concerned, because my true passion is cooking, rather than the sort of administration, the chaos of opening restaurants. Much as it's great fun for a while, at one point your body does start to give up.
Well, I was going to say, you guys, I read online that you guys went from 0 sales to 12 million in 5 years. That sounds like a pretty crazy roller coaster.
Oh yeah, it definitely was, and you can't keep doing that without burning out completely. And also, as I said, I was an accidental restaurateur. You just fell into it. It was a real zeitgeist. It was the start of the burgers and cocktails thing. As soon as we opened up, we had about 3 other places within 100 yards of us, all offering the same things. We still had all the queues and everything. So, but there was also the fact that it was born out of a desire, partly from when I was touring a lot, that everywhere I was so bored with bella pasta and stained starched white tablecloths and things like that, and it was just so homogenous that I thought, well, there's no reason that it can't be fun and a bit raucous, and it's just, as I said, it was of its zeitgeist, I think.
And looking back to when you had like the van, I was really intrigued about the van, because I remember I was on Twitter in those days, and there was always like a hype. You were going viral before viral was probably a thing. And do you think that it's multifaceted? Do you think you sort of contributed to making street food / serving food out of vans popular? Because in America, it's normal over there. People always eat out of vans. But I think in the UK, it was always looked down on, serving food out of vans. And now it's just not anymore.
I think the UK has its own hurdles to overcome with eating out of vans, in that we don't have streets that are 4 or 5 lanes across. We also don't have parking spaces where you can fit these things. There's there's just some very big logistical challenges, and that's why street food, to be honest, in England, in my opinion, isn't really street food. In that, in America, street food kind of goes to where it is. You'll see outside factories at lunchtime. You'll see 5 or 6 vans. They're there for an hour and they're gone, and then they're on to the next place. Whereas here, because of everything from planning restrictions, bureaucracy, cost. There's a lot of red tape, but also just the sheer logistic of like, where are you going to actually do this? We started doing it in car parks, industrial estates, things like that, on private property. What's happened is that it serves. You have a culture now of its own, I would say, which is based around buildings. Ironically enough, where you get conglomerations of traders who populate them and sell food that would be commonly sold on the street in other places. A lot of those guys have vans. Some guys never had vans to start with. Some of them now are just bigger name brands going in and doing street foodie sub brands. And so there's a whole culture around it. I suppose the closest thing would be the food courts. Yeah, it's a cross between the food malls in the United States and the street food courts in Singapore.
Yeah, I think you're right. We don't really have that. We don't have that infrastructure at all. And if anything, that sort of thing is probably looked down upon and penalised in the UK. Whereas if we look at have you heard of halal guys? The halal guys.
Absolutely, yeah. In New York.
Yeah, in New York, they take up all 4 corners of this street. You know, they've got 3 shifts a day, and then another van comes and parks up in its place, and it all comes out of a central unit. I can't think of anything like that over here. I can't think of one thing.
There's a really interesting side to that in that in New York particularly, they provide such a service because in the financial district, in a lot of the high end areas, the only food options are very, very high end, very expensive. They're sit down with a $200 bottle of wine, which is fine for the bankers and the traders, but for the secretaries, for the guys in the mail room, things like that. And there just isn't the retail space available for these guys to come in. And also the retail space is so expensive and there isn't any trade in those areas in the evening.
Yeah.
So they actually fill a really, really vital role within that particular geographical area and society, and they've now become a sort of a bit of a cult. I think I heard them mentioned on 2 or 3 podcasts in the past couple of months alone, actually.
Yeah, I think they have got a cult status. I spoke to the guy that brought it over here, actually, and they're in Leicester Square, and it's so different to the origins. You know, if you think for a start, it's a static site. You know, it's in Leicester Square, so it'd be interesting to see if they can do the same thing. And
interesting also to see how it stacks up against the Great British Kebab.
Yeah.
Which, it might be that it finds more of a place with tourists to London than it does with Londoners itself.
Especially being in Leicester Square.
Indeed.
Yeah. And I suppose if you look at the classic doner kebab, which is probably quite, to many people, they look down on it. A lot of people say, I grew up around them, so I'm not offended by them, you know. But I think that, you know, you see like the German doner kebab company come into the UK and they seem to be doing really well.
Yeah, they are. I think they're probably not doing as well as they possibly thought or want. Yeah. I don't, because weirdly enough, although the doner kebab or the shawarma, however you like it, even if you just look at very narrowly the doner kebab, the classic elephant leg, which myself too, I'm a South London Greek, and I do have a penchant about once a year for, or should we say, a need to have one about once a year. Even though you have identical doners in France, in Germany, in England, and here in Spain, they are served in different ways with slightly different kinds of sauces, in different kinds of bread, with different kinds of salads and pickles and things like that. And I think that a doner kebab is one of those things where the style is really homegrown. I mean, the doner kebabs that are done in Berlin, for example, all by Turks, are nothing like a doner kebab you would get in Turkey. So I think it's quite interesting to see how people, like different cultures, adopt food from without their own culture and then adapt it to their own. And I suppose the classic for that is British curry.
Well, exactly, yeah. It's something we touched on before we started, wasn't it? Like, you know, some of the Chinese food you find in England, you just wouldn't find in China. And I suppose the same applies for every culture every cultural food.
Absolutely. For me, the biggest shock for me was when I first started traveling around the States a lot. I was fascinated by Chinese American food, and it all looked and sounded so great. But it all just tasted very, very blunt to me. Very, very sweet and sour, or just there was very basic flavour profiles. And it actually gave me newfound appreciation for our more nuanced form of Chinese gloopy takeaway over here. I must say, even in some of the best places in the states that eat Chinese food, there's still just don't quite hit it for me. But again, I think that's probably because I grew up with the classic British takeaway in the late 70s, early 80s.
I was brought up in the fish and chip game, and my parents, you know, that's what all my family, that's what they had, fish and chip shops. And, you know, within that, there's great ones, and within the family unit, there's crap ones. And but you know what? I've always liked a doner kebab, like, and it, you know, hot chili sauce, mayonnaise, cabbage, lettuce, whatever, salad. And recently I was in Bristol with my brother-in-law, and we had a few drinks one night, and we actually went to what you would classify as a dirty kebab shop. And you know what? I didn't care, you know, but yet in my everyday work, you know, I advocate high standards and good quality, but every now and then you just have to have a doner kebab. You know, not to say that all doner kebabs are bad, by the way, because
absolutely not.
You know,
as a child, we had 3 options for doner kebabs, and I think the first one was down the road, and that was not good. And they were all, if you looked at them from the outside or even on the inside, the menus absolutely identical. However, then there was the good one. If my dad really fancied it, and he'd drive us up to West Norwood. Then there was a really, really amazing one over in East London. And my dad would take us up there, and then that's the only one where we'd eat in. But the difference between, although, as I say, they look the same, it's the same ingredients, but just I think the difference between how much care they take through every step of the process, like, really dedicates it. And funnily enough, my next project that we're working on at the moment is a chili sauce, which is an homage to the classic, what we've called a London hot sauce that you would get in a kebab shop that's usually kept warm in a bain-marie. In that it's the only sauce chili sauce that I really know of that you can put on literally with a ladle and still be able to eat it. So we've done our new brand is Bossman, as I say, as a tip to the hat of the bossmen behind the counter all around the country, mixing up their own hot sauces.
Well, I look forward to trying that one day, because I do love it. I think I told you before, I'm partial to a hot sauce, but I love all hot sauce, but I do like that. I you know, on the kebabs, it just works, you know.
Absolutely, I think it's a very, very simple sauce. And there's so many chili sauces now are extremely complicated, or they have to be very strongly flavoured with something else as well, or they're just all about heat. So sometimes you just want a bucket load of chili and still be able to sort of speak without crying through the tears.
Yeah, no, I get that. And when you're back in the UK, let me know, and I'll get you a bottle of Mary Sharp's hot sauce sent over. It is just such a great hot sauce. Like I think there's like 3, maybe 4 ingredients, and it's habaneros, carrot, vinegar, and yeah, it's just so good.
It sounds very much like my partner. She's from Barbados, and she has a favourite hot sauce from over there that is orangey yellow,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's so flavoursome. And again, you can keep on eating it. It's not the kind of thing that you have one bit on with one food and spend the rest of the meal desperately trying to taste something else.
I can't remember the name of that hot sauce, but I think it's got Scotch bonnets in. And I think that's why it's more yellowy. But no, you're right. You can eat it and you're not gasping for air. And it's really weird because none of my family like hot food. And, being obviously from a Cypriot background, born in the UK, Cypriots don't really have hot food, so I'm trying to think, there's no dish from our culture that is spicy. I think that as far as we go, it's probably cumin. That's a spice.
The only thing I can think of from Greece, and I'm from the very, very north of Greece, right up in the mountains, is we had toast, which is a kind of double-layered toasted sandwich with cheese and ham, and they would cut the toasted sandwich in half and then put it back together again. But between, they would use what was it? It was oregano, salt, ketchup, mustard, and then you could have red chili flakes on it.
Okay, that sounds nice.
And then yes, I think you get chili, like pickled chilies up there. But I have a feeling that's much more of the sort of Turkish Ottoman influence.
Yeah, I guess it would be. Like Aleppo chili flakes are amazing. I love them.
Yeah.
But I was introduced to chili completely on accident. And I remember I finished school one day and Mum goes, "Oh, I'll just make you a sandwich and you can have a sandwich and we'll have dinner later." And I was right, a little podgy thing. I still am. And so I have this sandwich and she goes, "Oh, by the way, I've bought some nice little peppers." And I was like, "Yeah, whatever." So I'm sitting there, I ate this sandwich and I literally just start gasping. And she's like, "What's wrong?" Turns out she actually put Scotch bonnets in my sandwich, those little peppers that she thought were nice.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Honestly, after that, I just love chili. Like I was about 14, 15 and I love chili. And even now I love all different types of chili. And again, not so much that it burns your mouth. It's just, I appreciate the different types of chili. And, I don't know. I love the fact that you can use those little fiery peppers, the little fiery, what they're called.
Bird's eye.
Yeah, bird's eye. You just need a few of those, and it gives you piri ones. Give you this really sharp, intense heat, and then you can put loads of jalapenos in something else. So I just love chilies, and I think if you're doing a chili sauce, I'm really excited about that because I just love anything hot, but not, like I say, not blistering, so you can't taste anything else afterwards.
One of the first things we did when we got our house down here in Spain during the lockdown was to order a load of these Korean red chili flakes so we could make our own kimchi.
Yeah, nice.
And I don't know if you've ever had these, but you get them in these big foil Ziploc bags, and when you open them, they're very, very mild, and the smell is of almost like smoked paprika, but hyper sweet. And it's funny, I've tried using them in anything else, but they don't really work. But for kimchi, I think it's gochugaru flakes, I believe.
Okay. I love kimchi. So good. It's so good. So if we look at let's jump on to today.
Yeah.
You're a consultant, you help lots of restaurants, lots of brands, whether it's restaurant, whether it's takeaway, whether it's food at home. Give us your thoughts on COVID, and you've probably got a little insight of being in Spain as well, and obviously talking to people in the UK. Give us a little bit about COVID and the current situation, your thoughts.
Well, where to start? I think that we're in an unprecedented situation. I think that the hospitality industry has so many different tentacles into so many other different industries, and so many unique hurdles that it needs to overcome in order to get back on its feet, that without really holistic effort from government, from the restaurants and bar owners, from the landlords, from councils, on every aspect, I think it's going to take years and years to recover. And I don't think that I don't think most restaurants will have got the pockets deep enough to last through till Christmas unless something drastic happens.
Wow, that's quite grave, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in the restaurant business for quite some time now, and you can see now that there's a lot of big operators that have just decided that they can't earn money. Whether that be, I think Frankie and Benny's shut down loads, the Capri shut down after 38 odd years, I believe, this week. So it's an industry which is based around very, very small margins. Those very small margins leave very shallow pockets when it comes to crises. And for restaurants, the amount, for some restaurants, it's all about the summer when people are outdoors or where they're drinking, or if it's football. For others, it's all about Christmas. So also the number of people it employs, not just there, but in subsidiary industries. I think it's everything from transport to social welfare system is going to be touched by this. I think the main problem that we have is social distancing, and I've got to say that in Spain here, restaurants have been open for about 3 weeks. In many ways, they're getting back to normal. They have terraces. Most restaurants here, the ones that don't are still really in trouble, and those terraces have been allowed to expand to I think 2 or 3 times their normal size in some cases, and that happened very quickly at a very local level. So they literally were coming down and saying, right, you can have this parking space and this parking space, and we'll move this out here. And then also the issue here is that the rents are, especially, I mean, I can't speak for Madrid and Barcelona, but the rents in most cities in Spain are just nothing like they are in England, and your fixed overheads, your fixed costs are much manageable, I think. Yeah. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, I've seen that Soho are looking at cutting off traffic over the summer to allow eateries and bars to expand into the streets. I think that's a great idea. I do think that I lived in Soho for a while over the Olympics, and they cut off a couple of streets there without thinking about it, and I saw the turmoil that it instantly spread out across about a square mile of London traffic-wise. So I think we do need to be careful about that. Yeah. But I think that it's those kind of initiatives that are going to be really important, and I think it's very important that they are done at a local level. That the local governments have got the power to actually go out down the high streets and go, right, what can we do for this place? What can we do for this place? What can we do for this place? Because it's not just restaurants, not the employment and bars, not the employment and the tax revenue and the tourists that they attract, but they do occupy a really vital social function in our society.
Yeah. One area in London that intrigues me a fair bit, and I think it's a special case, but this area was having problems. So Chinatown was having problems pre-COVID. You know, they were having problems with getting the talent they needed from China or wherever they get them from. And then if you throw in, a lot of people got scared of the COVID and the Chinese connection just before COVID hit the UK. How does somewhere like Chinatown really sort of, I'm talking about all of their little intricacies as well. How do they make it through such an issue?
Chinatown is a whole world of its own in so many ways. A lot of the original restaurants from Chinatown that arrived in the sort of last half of the last century, should we say, from the 50s onwards, they had very long leases, and those leases would come up, and now they're just unaffordable. So we've seen, some cases, different operators go in. We've sometimes seen them just shut up shop. It will be... One thing I've noticed is that the prices have gone up massively compared with a lot of the new operators, because they have to. They're paying rents that I would imagine are probably 5, 10, God knows how many times the rents of their predecessors, which were set so many years ago. So I think that, number one, the landlords, once again, have to be very careful that they don't price themselves out of business.
Yeah.
Especially if it's all very well saying, oh, well, we'll attract rich customers, but the fact is that people just aren't travelling as much as they were. And a lot of people have fled the big cities, that people that can. So I think a lot of things like that need to be taken into account. But without some kind of way of adjusting the rents to come into line with the reduced capacity and the reduced footfall in a way that does not adversely affect landlords as well, I think that has to be the priority. I haven't heard much about that coming out of the government so far.
Yeah, and I think, looking at your time at Meatliquor, you guys chose a lot of interesting sites. You won't class all of your locations as sort of prime sites. There was some were down an alley or in a different shopping centre rather than a main shopping centre. So do you think that people need to think a bit more openly when choosing sites as well? Because a lot of these sites that a lot of these restaurants took on pre-COVID were already quite out of their reach, and it took a crisis to actually sort of make the situation a lot worse as well.
Yeah, well, just like in 2008, you're going to see a hell of a lot more licensed premises being up for rent. Sometimes I would imagine, depending on what happens, it could be that they're on like literally £1 a year kind of rent, with the tenants paying business rates and upkeep. The short-term leases might come back in. It's going to be really, really hard, as I said, because it depends. This crisis has sparked off a wave of bankruptcies of not just businesses which weren't viable, but businesses which were viable or had been viable. But we can see now that the industry as a whole is literally been living on a knife edge.
Yeah.
And I've known that for years. I've experienced that for years. It's a hugely stressful industry to be in. And I really believe that some kind of reorganisation is needed into how the income is distributed. I mean, you've got sort of hundreds of thousands of pounds per year go, or if not millions, on a single property going in for rent, and then you have dozens and dozens of people working on minimum wage. Something needs to be equalised, and in the middle of that, you've got these companies which are literally having to fight tooth and nail to just stay in the black week on week, and some of them it depends on something as flippant as the weather. So,
I was listening to a podcast recently, and there was a couple of restaurateurs on it, and it was an American podcast, and they said that a successful restaurant will make 3 to 7% net profit. Would you say that's similar to the UK, or would you say it's different in the UK?
Good God. You know what? If you can be making that profit after all your expenses, then you're a successful restaurant, full stop.
Yeah.
I mean, there's if we look at the definition of a successful restaurant, if you look at El Bulli,
yeah,
I don't think that ever broke even.
Wow.
But it wasn't meant to. The kind of thing. It's like so should we say almost like a piece of art. But yeah, I'd say that. I mean, the margins that you're talking, are so razor thin. And as I said, they can. When we talk about those margins, you're talking about a business, some businesses which can do like 50% of their income over the Christmas period. That kind of thing, when you knock it, or over the summer period for other ones, once you knock out just one season, that's it. Do they have the finances to be able to restart?
Well, it sounds so difficult. It's like it's such a worrying prospect. So, like, I think, but I think a downside is that the perception from customers is that the restaurant business is a very good business. Because I think, not that it's a bad business, but I think that they would think that your margins are a lot higher than that. And I think that because they're happy when they're in your restaurants, they feel good. You've worked really hard to get the hospitality right. So they just think, well, it must be a happy place to be. But actually, it's the owner is probably really stressed, even pre-COVID, I'd imagine.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to calculate. The customer nowadays has so much choice. They're so well informed. They're so discerning. And they're so quick to communicate that you have to provide the absolute best possible experience in every way, from when you're ordering, from when you're reserving the table, rather, to how you come through the door, to when you're ordering the food, to the bill arriving. Every single thing has got to be perfect. And customers almost, I think, restaurant customers particularly, I think, are possibly more value conscious than almost any other kind of customer. They really know what they can get elsewhere. So you're constantly trying to provide the best possible quality. That, by nature, makes your food overheads quite expensive. So in order to be able also to provide good service, etc., 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 you've then got to make sure, and here is the key, that you cram as many people in as possible. And rents for licensed premises are very heavily linked to how many people can be contained in there, right? And that is set by licensing department in conjunction with the fire service, councils, police, etc. So it's a very fixed. So if I go in and say, right, I'm paying X amount of money for a restaurant that I can seat 100 people in, and therefore I'm going to give them this amount of food at this quality with this number of servers, and out of that I can make, as you say 5%, even 10%, to then say, okay, well, you can only have 50 people in this same space. So you used to be able to get 100 people. Something has to give.
Yeah.
So in that respect, there has to either be like less quality, less servers. I don't know how it's good. People are going to have to be able to want to eat at different times as well. Yeah. England has an absolute absurd situation where everybody wants to eat within the same hour every night.
It's true.
So, I think with England as well, we have the weather to contend with. I mean, not just England, but the whole United Kingdom.
Yeah, it's true.
The weather is a huge force in this, because it's all about being able to say, okay, well, we can expand on the pavement, but then you're going to have to start putting up things for the rain, and then for the heat. And the last thing anybody wants, I think, nowadays is hundreds of thousands of gas-powered patio heaters going up.
Do you see menus being streamlined? For example, one way to cut waste is to have smaller menus. One way to promote a certain product and be a specialist, have smaller menus. So, for example, being a fish and chip specialist, being a noodle specialist, being a burger specialist, as opposed to a very general menu that does burgers, does fish and chips, does Chinese food, does a bit of Indian food. Do you see those sort of restaurants maybe struggling a little bit?
I think those kind of restaurants have been going out of fashion for quite some time now. However, there is a problem with menu expansion that's been going on for at least a decade, and that it ties in a little bit back to when we were talking about street food. So when you're a street food trader, say you sell burgers, when you do burgers and just burgers, everybody will laud you for your dedication to just doing one thing and doing it really well. You then open a restaurant and everybody wants fries with their burgers. Now they bring their friends, but their friends want fried chicken or a chicken burger. So they're, as much as I think it would be great for the restaurants to do, because it does actually, it's so much easier you get fresher food because there's not so much stock. There's better stock rotation. However, we are also going to have to bear in mind the fact that not just COVID, but if there is some kind of no-deal Brexit, there may be further interruptions to the supply line.
Yeah.
With COVID already, what's happened is that not just restaurant suppliers, but supermarkets have had to reduce the number or the variety of items. So whether you might used to be able to get 6 different types of tomato ketchup, you can now only get 2. So I think that it's probably going to happen, and I think the public are going to have to get used to it, really, and not be quite so demanding about being able to have everything at every restaurant at all times.
I almost feel like this sort of trying to be everything to everyone is because a lot of people have probably copied McDonald's a little bit, and also they've got shareholders, they've got big loans, and they have this unit and they think, well, I've got this unit for 24 hours a day, a rental unit, how can I get maximum amount of it? Oh, well, let's do breakfast, so let's open up at night and do drinks, and let's not close at lunchtime, and now let's try serve vegans, and nothing against that, but I feel that if everybody stayed in their lane, it might be more beneficial in that way.
I think I completely and wholeheartedly agree, but speaking from experience, I could say that you can't say I'm not going to serve vegans. You can't say I'm not going to serve. You have to be inclusive. But whether I think we've seen a lot of should we say, like the recent vegan chicken places that have come up. I think I'm not sure how many of them are still open. I'm presuming quite a few. But I think it's down to the public, actually. We've sort of come out of a golden age of being able to have often amazing quality food and a huge variety of food in every restaurant. I think the public will have to get used to it, or they'll be getting better food.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you're right. We're going for a burger because we're going to have an amazing burger, or we're going for fish and chips, or again Chinese food. And I think that might, rather than getting generic of because imagine all these restaurants that think of like a Frankie and Benny's, which is probably in some. Again, not judging people that go there, but it's not really an Italian restaurant, and you think they've got everything. They've got burgers, they've got fish and chips, they've got pizza, they've got everything. Well, you can't keep all of that food fresh. We mentioned it earlier about Greek food when we were setting up, didn't we? If they 30 meze items, well, 4, maybe 10 of those are not going to be that great, because they've been sitting around for 4 or 5 days, unless it's a very, very, very busy site. And I do wonder what starts to change is COVID just going to make people look at the bottom line a lot more?
I think so. I think you're absolutely spot on there.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things that comes up in conversation a lot in private circles, it just hasn't been recorded a lot, is that, the hospitality industry is one of the biggest sort of taxpayers to the government, and whether it's just VAT, corporation tax, PAYE, all of this, and then obviously business rates, and yet we don't have a hospitality or tourism minister. Can you see that changing in the near future?
I would not want to preempt anything that our current government does. However, I would say on the issue of tax, you're so right. It's not just the industry itself. It's if you look at all the restaurant supply industries, the logistical companies that deliver all the food, the butchers, the farmers. Now, one thing that I think has I can't understand in this situation is when you mention tax. We've had a problem recently within the industry in the UK with regard to the furlough payments, where the government, from what I understand, will not accept trunk as part of pay, which I find absolutely gobsmacking, because it goes through PAYE, it has tax paid on it, it is seen, it's taxed as part of income. So why is it not seen in this case as part of income?
Yeah.
And when you consider that it's for the vast majority of frontline restaurant staff and bar staff, particularly, that trunk is effectively what means that what gives them an ability to carry on without getting into debt.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think, like you say, tax has been paid on it. So it's on the pay slip. So why don't they just say, we're going to give you what was on your last 3 months pay slip? I find it incredible. Like, you know, but I think for the most part, the government has done really well. I think, but there's little things like this that make you think, come on, you've gone that far. Why not just go that little bit further?
Yeah, I think you're right. It is the little things, but they're little things that affect a huge amount of people in a very big way. If you said to any other industry, we're only going to accept 70% of what you've paid as your actual income, and the rest of it we're just going to kind of ignore, there would be uproar.
Yeah,
I think this might actually change the way that tipping and things are done. I think you might see that service charges, tips, things are a thing of the past, and that you have a full cost on the meal on the menu.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's such a bad thing.
See, tipping in the UK, it's sort of like, we're not as extreme as America. And it's sort of left to be to the customer's discretion to some degree, unless it's a big order, like let's say a party of 12. Is that the other reason why it probably wasn't considered? Because it's not a fully baked into the hospitality system like it is in America, let's say.
I think, America, for a start, a lot of their food workers are paid well. They're paid minimum wage by the time that their trunk is included.
Okay.
So basically, they'll have you effectively, you get your tips, and then the restaurant just tops that up to the minimum. Here, you can start looking at the difference between living wage, minimum wage, London living wage, and I think that the question. The main point is that it's already, from my point of view, that it's had tax paid on it. The government expects all tips in the UK to be trunked and to go through the PAYE system, to have tax and national insurance paid on them. And they are considered at that stage your income. So I just find it baffling that they specifically chose not to include it as part of people's income reciprocally. Although that may change.
Yeah, no. Well, let's hope something can be done there to accommodate it, and let's hope. Obviously, we're starting to see that they're moving into a different phase where the furlough system is starting to become a bit more flexible. Let's say, so hopefully they do start to take on this, this industry by industry information.
Absolutely, I think that's the key. Is everything that happens from now on needs to be really targeted at the specific industries, because every industry has its own set of issues and problems, and I think now we need to sort of really start talking to people in the industries, and making sure that government really does understand what specific needs, requirements the industries and the people that rely on those industries for their income and in order to pay their taxes need.
So on the sort of topic that most restaurateurs or takeaway owners hate, VAT. Many countries in Europe have reduced VAT in restaurants to the same level as takeaways. UK has always been 20%, whether it's a takeaway or restaurant. What's the thoughts on them sort of lowering VAT?
I think initially you just need to get restaurants need to be open, and the whole VAT issue in England is slightly different. in particular in town centres, where just the overhead ground rents and the business rates, the cost, there's no way that any of these businesses can be viable at 50% of their previous capacity without something happening. And VAT is not going to change that. So I think that's something to look at in future. But again, at the moment, it's kind of hard. It would be hard for anybody to really make too many predictions because there's no input from the sector.
Yeah, I think for me, and we discussed it earlier again, is that I think this is all good and it's great rhetoric because we want to see the economy stimulated and we do want hospitality and tourism to be at the forefront because it will be anyway. But at the same time, it's best to have no restrictions, like, no social distancing, none of that, because there's no point encouraging people to come through the door if you can only have half the capacity. It's just, in my view.
Yeah, you can have, I think, hopefully, the way this might pan out is that by being able to allow restaurants and bars to expand outside of interior spaces initially, while things like, for example, insurance liability is worked out. If you have a restaurant and I come to it and I catch COVID from your restaurant, what's the liability on that? We've already seen huge issues with insurance companies and policies not covering COVID. So I think there is, before we can say everybody can open at 100% indoors, you need to look at how we're going to be able to do that and give the customers enough confidence to do it. In the meantime, there is a hell of a lot that can be done on multiple fronts to be able to advance that, I think, and to make sure that its businesses are viable. Businesses are not decimated by social distancing.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I read earlier is that some restaurants will be encouraged to take the temperature of guests on when they're coming in, and I just thought, I get it. It sounds great on paper, but I'd hate to reject someone because they were a couple of degrees over. If I'd been in the tube and, let's say I was on the tube, I walked over to the Wolseley, I walk in and they're like, "Oh, sorry, sir, you're a bit hot." I just wonder, would that aggravate some people?
I believe that is what could be classed as security theatre.
Yeah.
That you have to look at the fact that we're not even doing that at any airports at the moment. I was looking actually at how the tourism industry has just reopened as a test in the Balearic Islands.
Yeah.
10,000 Germans have been flown over there. And today, I think, was the first day, and some of the reports are they're being tested like 4 or 5 times, literally like every time they pass a member of staff, they're being tested. They've got thermal imaging cameras everywhere.
Okay.
However, I mean, restaurants are a very hot environment, a lot of them. In England, you've got people sometimes standing outside under heaters. You've got the whole queuing thing needs to be looked at. To be honest, if you get to the stage where you can reopen safely, I think that kind of security theatre provides negligible results, and I think we can see that from the fact that ports of entry aren't even doing it anymore.
So it's more giving customers peace of mind, a perception, as opposed to actually having any real use.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's a hell of a lot of things that restaurants can do involving mandatory sort of face coverings. I mean, some people might have to screen off booths in certain areas. I think I've been looking quite a lot into air conditioning. There's been some interesting tests done on air conditioning in planes, offices, restaurants, and some public transport and buses, and modelling how it spreads. And actually, I mean, in a long term, we are an industry which does have in England, most restaurants have some kind of climate control in them. That's not bad. I mean, you can start to add things like you might start to see stuff like affordable UVC units that could be installed into pre-existing air conditioners, in the same way that some outlets and kitchens already have things like that. You might see that air conditioners need to be moved. Make sure that it's not recirculating, that they're flushing out. People might need to add more. I think at the moment, the danger is as well that people are invest way too much in things that are later proved to not be very effective, and that they then don't have the funds available to make the required changes when we do open up. Yeah, and I think that's actually something that is going to be very important. Is that if these companies are expected to invest in everything from face masks. If you go into a lot of the bars around here, they have full plexiglass shields around all of the bars with just little dispensing holes, things like that. I think there's going to be a lot of companies, especially smaller companies, who need to make some capital investment. Yeah, and I think that it's in this industry, it might be an idea if there was specific low interest loans, even grants, I would say, that go specifically towards capital investment for health related things, that anything that's necessary by legislation in order to reopen.
Yeah, I suppose it would be good if the government could, maybe guarantee pricing, approve the products, and then say, here you go. Well, you're allowed it and it's free because you have an A5 license or an A3 license, and that would probably be nice. Obviously, whether they do it or not is a different story.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. To be honest, there's a hell of a lot else that's going on. But it's as I say, I think anything within this sector that needs to be done has got to be done on a holistic level. We saw, apart from anything else, at the start of the crisis, just the impact within a couple of weeks of lockdown that it was having on the restaurant food providers, who suddenly had all this food with nowhere to distribute it to. Yeah. And there was food rotting, and at the same time there was people queuing up for food banks. So I think it could really do with I don't know, almost like a food czar coming in and having a look and looking at some of the built-in structural deficiencies of our food supply system.
Yeah, I think so too. I think a lot of these things are just going to open obvious glaring errors that haven't been corrected for a while, and hopefully they do. I think what we're talking about, PPE or that is probably being done in good faith, but people don't realize that it could be bad, is that if you think most takeaways have very, very sort of powerful extraction units, and fish and chip shops probably have two, one on the range, on the frying range, and one maybe on a kebab area or another area. And then if you put up these acrylic or polycarbonate panels from top to bottom, side to side, and you've just got one little opening to take money or to pass food, essentially what you're creating is a vacuum, a funnel. And if someone comes in and they've got, whether it's flu, COVID, whatever they've got, if they cough in your shop, your restaurant, your takeaway, all of that is coming your way. And I do wonder if that is probably an overkill again.
Absolutely. I mean, what I haven't seen any of that in any of the takeaways here. Takeaways in Spain, for example, take all the orders at the door, and you have to wait outside. That's just how it is. I don't actually know whether that is I'm pretty sure that isn't a requirement from government. That just seems to have been a kind of unwritten rule that everybody seems to have agreed on. Yeah. So there's that aspect. What I'm talking about with the plexiglass seals are more just around like a little cafe or bar without extraction. They're also, until now, they've only been allowed for a week now. I think they can let people in, but at 50% capacity, and at the bar 2 meters apart. However, you then have to, again, we're still very early on in all the science of this, but one has to look at the possibility that you suddenly got a screen. Is that providing just an extra surface for which germs can accumulate on? And we do know that COVID can stay for a long time on surfaces. So it's also what material the screens are made out of.
Yeah.
For everything we do, we then have to put in a specific cleaning regime.
Yeah.
So all of that has to be thought through, I think.
I read that bacteria, germs like that really can stay alive for a long time on very smooth surfaces, and on rough surfaces not so much. So you do think that carpets are dirty, but actually they break up bacteria apparently. And that was I think it was in the Scientific Journal or New Scientific, I can't remember. And they said that's why soap, for example, is really good, because hard soap, because it's quite abrasive and you're rubbing it off and it washes away with the water. So again, I think you're right. I think it's going to be a massive learning curve. And I think whatever we think we know now is probably going to be updated with new information in about 6 months' time.
I do hope so.
Well, and I think what's worrying is, we're talking about regenerating the economy and everyone getting back to normal, but there are some countries that are seeing a second wave. And, I read yesterday that Beijing is seeing a second wave. New Zealand are worried because they may have one after letting 2 people through. USA are seeing some parts where they're getting a second wave. So I do wonder, what sort of, are we ready for that? I know we've always spoken in the UK about be careful of a second wave. And I know that there's some health ministers in Europe saying be careful of a second wave. And I think we do have to be very cautious about that.
Yeah. As I said, I believe they completely locked down Beijing yesterday, from what I can gather. And I think you do have to look again at the, especially at winter. We've got the winter flu that's coming along, no doubt. And then if you look at our industry at Christmas, you've got by nature hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people crammed together in a sort of sweaty, usually hot atmosphere. Often they've been crammed on public transport, sweating before they get out into the cold weather. You can't really think of the places which could be if it just stays like it is at the moment. So I think we have to look at as well the number of bars, things like that make all of their money, that become viable businesses basically because of Christmas.
Yeah.
And how do you manage that? I mean, you can't. Nobody is going to want to have an office party with 2 meter.
No, exactly.
Distancing. Our office party is going to be a thing of the past. So I think it's also there's a lot of business owners at the moment scrambling around their business models, trying to see in what ways they can try and embrace the rules of the new normal, as opposed to being stuck in the old, this is the only way we make money.
I think in some ways, that's also because of, maybe I'm overthinking this a little bit, but I think the taxation system in the UK still treats eating out as a luxury. And I think in Europe, especially mainland Europe and America, actually, they don't treat it as eating out as a luxury. They see it as people are going to do it. It's a popular thing. Let's tax it, but maybe not at 20%. And I think maybe that's where if that was reduced, and then all the other things fell into line, like business rates and business rents. Business rates are some of the highest in Europe. Rents are, again, some of the highest in Europe. If all of these things can correct themselves, and hopefully with intervention from the government, then over the next few years, that could spell a better situation for the industry.
Absolutely. I think that sort of hard reset and looking at what I do truly, honestly believe the industry's got to the point where its overheads are unbearable. And there will be, if COVID hadn't come along, I'm sure as soon as there'd been a next slight wobble in the financial world, I'm sure you'd have seen thousands of otherwise viable businesses crashing to the ground. So maybe I think you're bang on the money there. There is a way to do this, to relook at all of those of the the unaccountable expenses or the your overheads that this industry has to bear. It just needs to be a political will to do it. And I think I can't overemphasize this amount. They need to start looking at it now. I'm sure they are. I hope they are, because it's going to be too late in 3 or 4 months' time to start going, right, how are we going to get through the next bit?
No, I agree. Well, look, man, I think, we've touched on loads of things. Have we missed anything?
Not that I can think of. Maybe the kitchen sink.
What you got planned for the rest of the day in Spain?
I'm going to go and have some tapas, actually. I'm lucky enough that I live in Granada, so tapas is free here.
Oh, wow.
And they do a really nice, the local beer, Alhambra, does a really good 1% one. So, yeah, I allow myself one of those when we go for a tapas.
How can tapas be free? Give me a little insight on that.
So since the days, I believe, of the 16th century after the Reconquista.
Yeah.
I think it was Queen Isabella decided to... that there's a lot of different theories and legends. One is that the local population in Andalusia were very, very poor, and the men would come back from the fields and they would go and drink all their money, and then they would go home and not eat.
Okay.
So they tapa means cover, and so she brought in the rule that any drink that was wine or beer, not spirits, because the theory was that if you can afford to drink spirits, you can afford to eat.
Fair point.
But if you had a wine or a beer, it would be covered with a little plate of food, which you had to eat first.
Ah.
There's also ones that I think somebody covered the king's food or the king's drink with a plate of bread to stop the flies getting in.
Wow.
And it came off from there. But anyway, in Granada province in Andalusia, it's, I think, pretty much the only province where you, by law, get a free tapas. So it might be a plate of pork, it might be some of the local morcilla, the black pudding smeared on bread, some chorizo, some jamon, some ham. So you can actually have pretty much a good meal for two for about £6 or £7.
Wow.
As long as you don't mind not knowing what's coming up.
Yeah, sounds fair.
Yeah, it's perfect. It works really well.
Our days couldn't be any different. I've just had my warehouse send over a pallet of stock that I need to send out. So I'm going to be popping it all into boxes and sending out samples to people. So our days couldn't be any different.
well, enjoy depalletizing your stock, I'll send you a couple of photos.
Oh, you know what? That sounds amazing, Yanni. Sounds
really glad it is. Anyway,
thank you very much for your time. And when you're back in the UK, we'll meet up. All right.
Cheers.
Be good, man. Bye bye.
Bye now.